Hello and welcome to episode 15 of the Recruitment Intelligence podcast. Today I'm joined by Gavin Speirs, CEO of Solutions Driven. Hi Gavin, how are you?
Yeah, good. Thanks, Claire. How are you?
Very well. And also by Nicki, Chief Growth Officer at Solutions Driven. Nicki, how are you today?
I'm very well. Thanks very much, Claire.
Excellent. So today we are talking about measures of success in embedded recruitment. Over the last couple of years, we've noticed that conversations have been changing in the recruitment world, and the idea of embedded or RPO recruitment is coming up more and more. So we this week are launching SD Embedded, and so I've brought Gavin and Nicki on to discuss this with us. So Gavin, I'm putting the first question to yourself, and that is why now? Why has Solutions Driven launched SD Embedded?
Because we've come up with a really innovative name of SD Embedded. It was the right time to launch it. So I think, joking aside, we've on and off been doing what is now called embedded for quite a few years. Going back 15, 20 years with on-site projects, with RPOs, etc. And I think to your point, the conversation has definitely changed over the last few years, where clients are looking for a more dynamic, flexible outsourcing embedded solution. Why? Because maybe they can't predict longer term. Maybe they need something more agile to support their business. And really, from our perspective, it's a logical move for us. So we have, our assignment and search business. That's a very high value add, high touch, relationship with customers. That embedded is very similar. That really we are supporting the client rather than supporting the role. So from our perspective, it's about moving towards continuing to support clients, but in a more embedded, dedicated way. And I think, going back to, I put a post out last week in LinkedIn that, talked about recruitment's getting more complicated. There are so many things that you need to think about. And the role of a recruiter is growing. There are lots of challenges just now around how do we engage talent, how do we ensure that the talent is diverse enough, etc. And I think as a result of that, companies are saying we need help. And rather than just looking for an agency partner, they're looking for a team who can plug and play, can add value to their business, but also complement what they're doing as well. So I think that's really why now. I think that the timing is right, both from a solutions-driven perspective, but also from the market's point of view, in really making sure that we add as much value to our customers that we work with.
I mean, I think as well, on that topic, Gavin, I think we've been speaking to a lot of clients and a lot of companies who, whose HR and TA teams have been squeezed. Maybe they've had a slight period of, revenue issues or funding issues. And one of the functions that's been hit hardest there has been that HR and TA function. So a lot of the traits that they were trying to implement into that team, or a lot of the strategies that we're trying to put in place, all of a sudden you remove some of those key members, you're not quite hitting those goals. And as people have tried to grow again over the last couple of years, they've just not had that strength of HR, TA team that they maybe once had to hit goals in a much more difficult market. And it's certainly not getting any easier to hire recruiters either.
And that's the thing, I think the role of an internal recruiter is also changing. I think as they are getting stretched, they're spending less time on sourcing. That sourcing is taking longer, engagement's taking longer. They probably don't have the time to A/B test what is the right outreach message to candidate X for this type of role. So I think you're absolutely right. At the same time as organizations changing their size of the TA team, the market is also getting harder, which I think causes, that gap where an embedded solution can definitely help.
All seems like a bit of a culmination of all of the changes that have happened over the last couple of years have come together and just really pulled that need into right now. And Solutions Driven has obviously kind of responded to that at the moment. So Nicki, perhaps one of the questions that I asked when you both started talking a bit more about embedded was, why do companies need embedded rather than assignment or project recruitment? And at what point, when would they need one and when would they need the other? And I know we spoke about this before, Nicki, and I wondered if you could elaborate a bit more on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think if I take the clients that we're working with at the moment, and we were seeing a lot of successes, when we work even on an assignment, it's not transactional. We're finding out lots about the value proposition of a client, lots about the brand, lots about what candidates think of them. So we're working in a very big picture way. I've had clients come to us and just say, I really, really liked working with Recruiter X. They totally get it. How I like to be approached. They, explain our business extremely well. So there's a consistency approach where a lot of clients look at it and say, if I could have 10 of that recruiter, God, we'd have an amazing team. Or if I could really, keep or retain that particular recruiter for a period of time, that would be my in-house recruiter. I've been struggling to get one, etc. And we're just very fortunate we've got a big team like that, and we've also got an engine that has allowed us to continue to hire and develop that good talent. I think there's a lot of different answers to this question, and I can only go with our experience and say we've worked with clients that have just been super happy with the results and they're approaching a period of growth. I've worked with other clients where they've said, we have struggled in a particular function or a particular geography, or we're growing into a brand new one where we don't just have the capability, the know-how, the tech stack, the relationships. Or it could be purely down to an initiative. Another client came to us about, they had an aging workforce, they were losing people were retiring a little bit early, they simply could not replace. And their whole game plan was to go and hire a level down and develop. So we had to just understand where that talent was and really build up the pipeline, the engine of doing that for them. Other areas have been a real commitment to diversity, and adding something to their current recruitment process that wasn't quite there before. So to me, it could be quite simply a capacity issue, or it could be an initiative, a challenge within the business, and embedded fits perfectly for that.
I think also it's that consistency and predictability. If a company is looking for this to build up knowledge with a partner and work with the same people over a period of time, and let's say they have hiring needs, let's say over the next 6-9 months, then it makes sense, because if you're working with let's call it a traditional agency partner, you're not guaranteed that that person's knowledge will be transferred on to the next person that's working with you. And I think nowadays, from an employer brand perspective, from a candidate experience perspective, knowledge of a client is absolutely key. And knowledge of their process, knowledge of what they like, the way they work, etc., what systems they use. And I think, when we have a team that's embedded in a client, it's not only about the results that they deliver, but it's about the client experience as well, and making sure that there is that consistency and predictability, and also, scale that team can scale up and scale down, as and when required as well.
I think, one of the requests we had a couple of months ago, Claire, was simply, I was working with a very senior head of TA that was also doing a certain part of the recruitment that had been doing it for 15 years, almost in the war room for 15 years, and wanted to go and drive other initiatives. Recruitment was the part that, probably took the most time. And, having somebody there that had all the tools, that had that experience, that were excited about sourcing, excited about engaging the right candidates, that person kind of lost that buzz for the recruitment element of it. Yeah. So again, it's different people's stages as well, and there are companies that simply just don't have an HR and TA function that want to define what that looks like. And it might take a certain period of time to go from nothing to exactly what they want it. So we are very much aware that, there could be a shelf life on that. It could be 6 months, it could be 2 years. And how do we help take that client from point A to point B and leave them in a much, much better place?
Sounds like it's a really flexible solution. So I guess my next question would be, what are the different ways that embedded can be utilized? You've answered that a bit in the previous question, but for example, is it only an end-to-end process, or will solutions driven come in with an embedded process just for the sourcing of ideal candidates? Can you expand a little bit on that?
So a good question, Claire. I mean, I think it's really down to the end goal that the client is looking to achieve. No doubt we could plug and play parts of our methodology or our processes, if there's a gap there. For me, I really genuinely believe that we work best, or recruitment works best, when everyone is aligned. HR and TA, the hiring managers, stakeholders, and us. And if everybody's driving the same initiatives, there's no point in plugging us in to pass through 50 CVs if the hiring manager doesn't have the time to look at them, for example. It's truly looking at where are the gaps, where are the challenges, what are you actually going to measure us on? What do you want to hold us accountable to? And we will thrive off of that accountability. If everybody is saying, we keep losing candidates out of the process, it's the experience. Great, let's talk about how we could get a brand new experience. Here's some of the tools and processes we would put in place to give them an awesome experience, and then measure, refine, continuously improve. I think there's a lot of elements to our assignment process that put us in a really good place for embedded, and it's why we've always been able to move agile. You talked about that fluidity earlier on, and I think it's just scaling that then out. What have we done to have success with the client on one hire, and then how do they do that and create the consistency that Gavin was talking about earlier? If you're ramping up an entire function, an entire unit, a whole new business unit, for example. There's lots of ways though, but for me, what is the issue when you come in on day one, and what are you going to measure us upon month upon month upon month? And that's got to be where we come in and add the value.
Okay. And just going back to the start, like you're saying, there's no point just having us come in and scan CVs. And I guess it's the same idea, that there's no point having a recruiter who has been, working in the industry for 10 years and is fully trained in our recruitment process intelligence, to just come in and look at CVs. Sorry, Gavin, I think you were about to say something there, and I just jumped in.
No issue at all. I mean, I think also on top of that, and this is always a difficult one to say in podcasts like this, but I think picking the right clients for embedded is also important. So I know that clients will choose what's right for them, but I think when you're embedding yourself into an organization, it's usually for a longer period of time. Therefore, the client has to be ready for that, and has to have, the right process or the right level of engagement, to make both sides successful. So I think not only, where can embedded be used, I think it's also the client needs to be, ready for that journey. And I'll give you an example. So we're working with a client just now who are an industrial manufacturing organization. They have a TA team in the US, but they don't have one in Europe. And, we are really complementing their team in the US. So really a genuine extension. We're part of the team calls, we're part of, what's going on internally, because we're adding value, in Europe or EMEA when they are adding value in the US. And that's a good example of an embedded deal that not only the client needs, but it really works just in terms of that approach.
I think, you mentioned industrial manufacturing clients. I've got a lot of friends in the embedded space, and a lot of them are trying to win the next company that's about to IPO, the next company that's just had 50 million Series B, and they know there's going to be 50, 100 hires. I think, everybody's had a big shock the last regards to Klarna and Bolt and different things. Yes, it may sound amazing that a company is going to hire 50 people, but there's a reason why there are thousands and thousands of recs open in that tech space. And people are moving around so often. There's so many challenges in that spot right now. And it's not to say that we wouldn't help in that space. We have clients in that space. But there are a lot of traditional manufacturing companies that are having to pivot in what they are doing. You go from standard manufacturing to additive manufacturing, for example. You go from, your traditional factories to smart factories, and, your Amazon warehouses of this world, right? And a lot of these companies are, looking for new ways of doing things. They've done it this way for a specific period of time, and it might be attrition, it might be diversity, it might be any, a million different reasons, and looking for something that little bit different. It's not just the tech space. Obviously there's massive funding in that tech space, but right across STEM, I think there are thousands of examples of companies where embedded would suit really, really well.
That's a really good point. I mean, I think, embedded definitely was born out of the SaaS tech, scale up, funded organization, but I think we've really focused on complementing our core client base, which is clients across science, technology, engineering, manufacturing. And actually, some of the best embedded relationships we've got just now are with the clients that Nicki mentioned, which is that traditional company that now needs to think differently about, okay, the way I did recruiting 3 years ago is different now. And I don't necessarily just want another agency to help me. I need a partner that can add, longer term value. So that's really been our focus.
I think as well, if you think of the tech space, it does progress faster. So people adjusted to work from home quicker, working remotely faster, getting on Zoom and Teams faster. So it was probably a little bit easier for them to, trust that company to do the recruitment while they're not sitting in the office right next to them. There may be some traditional manufacturing companies that have 1,000 people on site. They see each other every day. To work with somebody in another office, another country, maybe was a step too far. So I think the world has got a much, much smaller place over the last couple of years. And I think a very key point of, who needs embedded, how can it work? Quite simply, we know that, when a new head of talent gets a role, one of the initial things is, how do you reduce agency spend? I speak to heads of TAs, HR directors every day where they say, we've got 15 partners, we've got 20 partners. I don't even know how many partners we have because the hiring managers are working different from the HR and TA team. It's about consistency. Everyone seems to be reviewing what they're doing just now. And yes, trying to reduce spend, but trying to increase their output. We're not naive enough to think that every company is going to use us for every role times X%. Or any company times, there's got to be the balance between what can we do ourselves versus what do we need to outsource. And if embedded is done right, we're seen as part of that internal solution.
Remember, we spoke a lot a couple of years ago about becoming that external, internal talent partner, and embedded just feels like an extension of that.
Absolutely.
Now, obviously, we talk a lot about data and intelligence and measuring the success, particularly in our assignments or our search projects. But how do you? There can be problems seen with embedded that it's difficult to measure how successful something a project has been when it's so long term. Gavin, would you mind just talking me through how a company and how we would measure whether an embedded project has been successful?
It's a really interesting point, and as we've researched embedded a lot over the last 6 months, without being cheeky to the sector at all, but my concern is embedded is really, we give you a recruiter, you manage that recruiter, and if you're not happy, we change the recruiter. And for us, it's much more about adding value. So yeah, Nicki's right. Right now, lots of people are looking at, what cost can I take out? Can I reduce agency spend? We really try and talk about what value can we add rather than what cost can we reduce. Yeah. I think going back to your point on how do you measure embedded, I would say there's short-term measures and there's long-term measures. I think one of the things that we would do, and we do, is when we start a project, we like to get a baseline on what is happening in the organization just now. For example, if the organization says, our average time to hire is 70 days, but we expect solutions driven to do it in 30 days, then something is misaligned. So we really need to understand, what is time to hire at the moment, what's cost per hire, what's the quality and diversity of a talent pool, how do they engage candidates, what have they tried, what have they not tried, etc. Because until you know that, you can't really then start to measure or plan to measure things going forward. So I would say short-term measures, long-term measures. I think the short-term measures are really around getting traction, and what we would call in our framework executing, right? Because, at the end of the day, we can say all the right things we want from an embedded point of view, but clients hire us to fill roles. And until we fill roles, we don't have the credibility to add other points of value, along the way. And I think that's why, anytime we launch something, we launch with a kind of framework of, what do we think is important as part of this journey? And we've come up with something that I think is quite powerful in the embedded space. And it really looks at the 6 areas that we believe are important to really nail when it comes to delivering an embedded solution. And the first one is simply expectations. And it's probably the most important. if a client has a different expectation of us or vice versa, it's never going to work, right? So really making sure that you absolutely nail at the start of that. What do you expect from us in terms of output, in terms of communication, in terms of reporting? What do we expect from you in terms of response, communication, etc., etc.? So really clearly defining that expectation. I think also engagement. I think that it's fine to have one sponsor on the client side that buys into embedded, but if the hiring teams don't buy into it or the level above don't buy into it, there's always a disconnect down the chain. So I think really making sure that there's true engagement on both sides from the solutions driven perspective, but also the client perspective. And then the third one is that execution that I mentioned, is really making sure that you make an impact, and that the client can tangibly see the impact that you're making even before hires are made. So clearly, hiring is a key impact, but are we doing the right things? Are we giving them the right data? Are we providing them insights? And are we doing things that make the client say, this makes sense? Then really efficiency. So, once we've got to that phase of execution, it's about looking and saying from an efficiency perspective, what could we be doing better? What's working, what's not working? Giving the client feedback to say, here's some ideas on what we're seeing working in other areas. And then the second last one for us is enablement. So actually making sure that we leave the client and we finish a project and the client feels more enabled than they did before we joined. And then the last one is just experience. Did the client have a good experience? Did we have a good experience? Did the candidates have a good experience? Did the hiring teams have a good experience? So that kind of 6 E's, as we'll call it, I think is a really good journey for any client or any prospect who is considering using an embedded partner to actually say, how do we map out success, on those areas? I don't know if that
And
helps.
I think, great explanation of that, Gavin, but I think again, not to downplay what any other company does, but you see an awful lot of, on day 1, we do this, and on day 10, we do this. And it's a straightforward process. It's very hard to have a straightforward process to fill assignment business, never mind, a variety of assignment business or multiple roles. I firmly believe there's an art and science to recruitment. I firmly believe to have success, you need a very consistent framework. And then you need to have very good experienced people that are bought in to what they're doing and also use their own instincts as part of that, and that 6E framework really allows us to go in some of those different directions for clients that have different challenges. And so far, that expectation is number one is key. It's not just about aligning on one job spec. It's typically talking about a vision that they maybe have 6 months down the line, or what's really not been working the last 6 months. But like you say, it's very key in any relationship, particularly in the embedded space, to get results early. Whether it's the stakeholder that's signing off on the agreement, the CFO just wanted to see what's going on, the hiring manager that's had the role open for a period of time, because quite frankly, hiring managers are still looking at HR&T and saying, why is this role still open? And HR&T are saying, I don't know, I'm trying what I was trying, a couple of years ago, and being able to get buy-in from HR&TA, hiring managers, is tough.
Yeah, absolutely.
It all seems like it's based around that initial alignment of both parties as well, and then you take the framework into that, and that is how you get success.
I think as well, there's a lot of people that you hear the word bum in a seat, or I'm struggling to hire a recruiter, can you just give me a recruiter for a period? And if that person fills a couple of roles, great. We want it to be much more than that. We've always wanted it to be more than that in the assignment world. We've always had clients that then say, hey, can you come and help us with this 10, 20, 30 role project? We've had clients for years saying, can I take that recruiter? So this isn't just, switching something on. This is something that's been carefully thought about and calculated. And, ultimately, we've always made decisions at Solutions Driven by asking clients what they want. And this is exactly what clients are after.
Culmination of the last 23 years of what Solutions Driven's been doing. So yeah. Listen, both of you, thank you so much for coming on to the Recruitment Intelligence podcast. Thank you so much for answering my questions on embedded, how to make it successful, why embedded why now is the time for embedded. I've really enjoyed hearing your answers. So yeah, both of you have a lovely day. Thank you so much, and I'm looking forward to hearing so much more about embedded coming out from all of us soon.
Thanks, Claire.
Thanks, Claire.